everyone. Thank you for joining us once again for RT Next, our new series of short, focused conversations on the future of travel in India and South Asia. As post-vaccine travel picks up pace in a few countries this summer, we wonder what's next for us. We wonder what the most important global trends are. We wonder if they will endure and whether they will help shine a light on the Indian travel sector's recovery in 2021 and 2022. At Outlook Responsible Tourism Initiative, an affiliate member of the UNWTO, we're really optimistic about the road ahead. And we believe, even at the cost of sounding trite, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. The question is, how do we get through that tunnel together as a community and build together, build something that is better and more resilient? And that's exactly why we are reaching out to the experts and the doers, the policymakers and the policy implementers for the RT Next series. We're really hoping they can help us plan better for the future and more than anything else, give us hope. I'm Shruti Banerjee, and I'm here today with our very first international expert on this series, who also happens to be someone I rely on routinely for advice, Ms. Megan Epler Wood, a global ecotourism pioneer, conservationist, research leader, and consultant on questions of managing sustainable tourism for destinations, businesses, and civil society. Megan has worked not in one or two regions, but in over 35 countries across the globe. And over the last decade, she has also spent a lot of her time sharing her vast knowledge and experience with packed classrooms at Harvard and Cornell University. Welcome, Megan. We're very, very excited to have you here with us. We're really hoping you'll share a global perspective with us on how tourism can heal and recover. But, thank you for joining us, because I know that the time difference is such that it's pretty early in the morning for you. I hope that's okay.
Oh, Shruti, it's a great pleasure for me to join you.
Thank you so much. Megan, let's jump right in, because we wanted to keep this short so that more people would watch it. I just wanted to quickly ask you that in the light of your last report, a Marshall Plan for Tourism, also the previous report, The Invisible Burden, do you think COVID-19 has been a crisis or an opportunity for us?
Well, I think it can be both, right? As the Chinese proverb says, right? In danger, there is opportunity. And obviously, it's a severe crisis from the health perspective. But for our field of sustainable tourism, it is a genuine chance to build back better. I actually like that theme, which is rare. These international themes can be phony and not always work, but this one really, really works. I think because governments can see the value of it and civil society likes it. And in general, it expresses what we're trying to do, which is build back better.
Absolutely. So that's, it's good to know that you feel that way. And I know that, we're all, of course, very closely following the developments of the Delta variant, and, also watching how, the tourism sector is bouncing back, at least in some sectors. But, are there any particular trends that you've been, following and that give you some hope? And I think, you talked about so many different incidents, in different parts of the world, which have been rather encouraging for those of us who are working in the sustainable tourism industry and have been talking about over tourism, especially you. So perhaps you could share a few trends that you think that will do us good going forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think we all know that up to 2019, we were facing a pretty severe crisis with over-tourism, the idea that too many people were crowding in what I would call hot spots of tourism around the world. And I think that our industry was unprepared for this in many ways, but even more so, our governments and municipalities, local governments were really unprepared. And so were, say, UNESCO World Heritage sites were very unprepared. And so that really led to a lot of discussion and even protests, as we know. And then when the pandemic hit, everything stopped. And of course, that led to a really interesting period of reflection that also, I believe, has been really enhanced by the opportunity to reach out to everyone by Zoom. I've had a lot of people complain about all the Zoom meetings, but I don't. I think it's an incredible opportunity to have meetings and discussions just like we're having. We can have more bilateral conversations with different countries that can look at the specific conclusions that are being drawn. For example, we did a forum last year with the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and that's when we premiered the Marshall Plan concept and can destinations rebuild with what kind of finance? And we put a lot of effort into that with the help of our colleagues in most, all of Asia, really. And what we found is that there's a severe lack of finance. So I feel a little alone in coming to that conclusion. I don't hear a lot about that still, but we are still banging the drum, and I think somewhat successfully. Overall, a finance community is always hard to tap. We are not the primary recipients normally of a lot of funding for sustainability. For example, tourism is seen as a somewhat difficult sector to even handle, but we're really saying to the international finance institutions and local finance and government that not only is this the time to finance, because of course the industry is way down, but also that it needs to be done with a whole new set of considerations. And so we're excited about that. There's actually a global trend now, which we have really found to be encouraging in the field of concessionary finance. So what that means is that public and private financiers can get together, and the public financiers really are the ones that provide the concessions. And then you try to go for this international trend and impact finance and combine the two. So what we're finding, just fascinating to see, this area is growing very quickly, but as a field, we aren't so good at, being prepared for that kind of finance. So what my team is trying to say is to both governments and, what I would say is financiers interested in our field, that we are an important recipient of this kind of building back better trend. And that, in fact, we're not going to be a more sustainable industry unless we have the kind of infrastructure that we need. In particular, don't we want to have more solar in tourism destinations? Don't we want to have better and more, for all residents, wastewater treatment and solid waste treatment? And so what we found with the Pacific Asia Travel Association is that indeed there are programs that are financing those issues, and that many of our tourism destinations are in small cities that could actually really benefit from that. So we're trying to help others to conclude that this is the way to go.
Perfect. So, Megan, just to try and ask you another follow-up question to this, really, there are a lot of, there are a lot of countries that are reconsidering the way they've been doing business. As they're not going back to business as usual. We're seeing trends, as you pointed out recently, that Venice, of course, has has asked large cruise liners to stay away. Amsterdam is cutting down on the number of tourists that it wants to have every year, and taking that hit. They're willing to cut down and take that hit in revenue. Even in a place like Costa Rica, which really opened up to the world very, very quickly, they are looking at encouraging travelers to carbon offset and use that money. So, I mean, coming back to these various incidents, and how do you see, for instance, this kind of carbon offsetting, or the kind of taxations or better processes that governments are looking at? Do you see that more and more people would do this, or do you think it's just a flash in the pan, and that when business resumes, people will be tempted to basically bring in as many tourist dollars as possible?
Well, I think it's going to be a combination of the two, and that there will always be the pressures of business to continue to expand. During the pandemic, I had some really fascinating in-depth conversations thanks to what the UNWTO forums have been doing. I met some folks who just work in hotel investment at the highest level. And their incentives are all about the number of rooms that they're going to build each year. And so I'm actually going to be joining some hotel investment forums this fall because that's a seriously flawed idea in the current environment when we're trying to investigate how to manage growth, right? And they felt that internally. They couldn't speak publicly about it, but in fact we have those kind of incentives. Similarly with airports, Shorty, I mean, I've raised this in Vancouver at a forum where there's a lot of interest in discussing how to bring more value add, right? How do we have those higher quality tourists? And it was a meeting of municipal government. So it was a really great conversation. And I just raised, well, you need to look at your ports and your airports because they're operating on often very different incentives. They're not often part of the conversations that we have for responsible tourism. And their overall goal is usually to, add gates and add more airport capacity. I mean, how many airports are actually getting smaller? I mean, that's not happening. And the same with ports. That's why what happened in Venice is, I think, one of the most interesting things that's ever happened in the history of sustainable tourism. And it just happened last week. And that is that Italy announced that they will no longer accept even medium-sized cruise ships in their port. Now they are going to relocate them to a larger port because the problem has been that they're going into that tiny port, and I'm sure many people have seen those photos. They literally loom right over the city. And it's dangerous. There's been near accidents and this type of thing. So it is a combination of safety as well that needs to be considered. But in Asia, you all are in the dead center market attraction for cruise ships right now. And of course, the growth of airports. Whenever I teach about airports, I always show the number of new airports that are being built in China at any one time. And, it's enormous. So we talk a good game, but when it comes to actually talking realistically about what it's going to take to lower volume, it seems to me those entry points need a lot more discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Megan, I mean, that leads me to the next question, of course, because you mentioned that in Asia, we're looking at a very different kind of growth. And it would be interesting to see how, if there is going to be any kind of, mitigation in the next few years. But what are your instincts telling you, Megan, about the shape of recovery? And I mean, I don't know if you want to hazard a guess at the timelines as well. In the APAC region, and particularly in South Asia, in places like India and, around in Sri Lanka and so on. So what is your hunch?
Well, I can't say, the timing because of all these variants and how they're spreading and the rate of vaccines. And I'm not enough of a public health expert to know how well that vaccine distribution is going to go and how well it's going to combat these new variants. So I think it's just too hard for me to guess the rate of recovery because I personally believe it's all based on getting the global community vaccinated. And there's going to be, certainly speaking from the United States, I've listened to some very, very good arguments that the US should put more financing than we already have in getting more vaccines to the general public around the world. So I support that idea. But in terms of how are we as a community or you as a community in South Asia going to prepare? Well, I think it could take a few more years easily. And so it gets back to what I'm saying, which is like, this is in a way, a golden opportunity to go after restructuring. And one of the things beyond the finance area, I've had the governance forum at Harvard that you participated in, and that was a really good opportunity to bring decision makers from government and civil society from around the world to discuss do we have the right situation to make good decisions? And the answer was, as you remember, no. That's a really hard thing to say to government. We need to restructure government. But, since I am in academia, at least in part, I'm going to continue to say this. We can't make the right decisions with the current incentives that we have with government, not only with the airports and the ports, but our destination management organizations and ministries are generally not, they don't have the teams they need in order to actually have the capacity to make good decisions about how to protect their most valued assets, which is their culture, their environment, and of course, their heritage, right? I mean, when you talk about India and Sri Lanka, heritage becomes like this massive consideration, as you know and have advocated for. Now, you can do things to encourage more heritage products. And I think that's great. I do agree that that's a great thing to do in India. And I personally would like to come back actually and do one of those heritage oriented trips because I didn't get a chance the last time I came. But I do think that it has to be more than product development. It has to be a whole set of efforts that are financed to protect heritage and to protect environment. And when I did visit your Responsible Tourism Forum, I remember hearing about the dolphins in, I forget, it was one of the
Goa.
Goa, yes.
Yes.
And how, the jet skis or whatever they were, there was a serious problem with harassment, and not to mention probably, affecting their birth rate and all of these issues. Now, it's good for the NGOs to advocate and do the science on that. I thought it was excellent. But what we don't have is the authorities to deal with it, right? Because they're too separated from tourism. So what we're really advocating for now is municipal authorities to add tourism experts that are paid for by tax. That means redirecting tax. So there is plenty of money to do that in a place like Goa, right? But it has to mean that new people are going to be, on the scene managing these issues so that the civil society isn't just left helpless, right, to stop the problem. So that's what we're advocating, and I am working with the UNWTO and their Department of Innovation and Education on addressing this issue with the training issue. So big announcement coming this fall.
Oh, excellent. That sounds fantastic. I'll certainly keep an eye out for the announcement. As an affiliate member, we are always looking for opportunities, and I think we don't do enough to explore how the UNWTO can help us, or other such organizations can help us. But there's a wealth of knowledge that I think, that we could all dip into, especially now. And in fact, I mean, you have already highlighted, a few thoughts that you had about restructuring and recovery, and how the governments could aid that. But are there any other specific pointers that perhaps, pieces of advice that perhaps you'd like to share with, with the policymakers or, policy implementers at the government level in India or in any of the South Asian countries?
Yeah, I would recommend when we get past the crisis. I mean, this is the tricky part of handling the crisis, right? Is that I understand that people are pretty tied up with the crisis, but certainly, and I don't know how India will handle this, but I've told you I'm working a lot in Canada, and I see Canada is not, they're still in the crisis too, right? So they haven't emerged yet, but their policymakers, I think, offer some pretty interesting reflections. First of all, they are tying all decisions to climate impacts. I love that. I personally feel that all decisions in tourism cannot be divorced from the idea of what is the climate impact of tourism. Now maybe there's a fear factor, right? Maybe but what I'm saying, I just want to say, is not scary. It's actually just a way of making good decisions. And at Harvard, we researched this for years, and we continue to look at it. We can do holistic accounting now. We've proven that with German government support, that we can account per tourist carbon emissions when they're in country, not just when they're flying in. Now, once that kind of tool is applied and by any destination, they can then begin to look at, okay, what are we going to do about our infrastructure to make sure that it is as carbon friendly as possible? Now, in Canada, I wouldn't say that they're doing it yet, because they're not. But what I would say is that their structure for finance now within the municipal system is to encourage municipalities to lower their carbon emissions. And say in India or any place else, if a big proportion of your emissions is from tourism, you can't ignore that. And in Canada, they're not gonna, they're gonna look at that. But what I find in many countries, and I can't speak to India, is that the idea of managing carbon emissions is divorced from tourism. I mean, absolutely divorced, and that all plans are pretty much laid out as if the problem of climate change isn't even happening. And I'm calling for the world to please stop this, that we have to tie our decision making on tourism growth with what are the carbon emissions.
And you think that offsetting is something we should do as well? I mean, apart from, of course, actually addressing the problem and looking at, systemic issues which could be corrected across the country. You do think that it's a good idea? I mean, I have to ask, because
I know.
which side of the fence
One of
are you
the
in?
trickiest questions, and it's very politically tricky, but hey, I mean, I've been studying this for a long time, and I'm not going to give you an advocacy position here. What I've looked at is that, in fact, we have more carbon than we can possibly manage right now from the travel industry by, setting out a carbon diet, right? But, a carbon diet is needed. Right? We all have to be responsible for our part of that carbon diet, and India's got a huge part of that. And don't forget, in India, a lot, if not all of that, much of that is domestic tourism. So you have to include international and domestic tourism in your plan for your carbon diet. Okay, so, like India's got a plan for a carbon diet. That's great. Let's see that. Now, and then I want to see the numbers on that. Okay, then, yes, let me see how much you want to offset. How will that work? Well, I've heard a lot of criticism, but here in the United States, interestingly, there's more of advocacy for it. Why? Because we have a very strong forestry community here, as do you. We have that in common. I've worked with a lot of foresters in your part of the world, and they are terrific resources. They should be part of that discussion, because you need to have a forestry plan within India so that that money can go towards reforestation in your own country. I think what people get afraid of, and I understand, it's tricky. How can you be sure that the offset money is going to the right place? And if you just go to the international carbon market, I'm not saying it's bad, but it isn't like reinvesting in your own economy. Anybody can actually set up a carbon market. It's not as bad as you think, especially in India. Come on. I mean, you guys have the absolute expertise to do that. Keep it local. And that way, not only will it benefit your economy instead of sending it into some, international system, but it will drive your whole economy of lowering, the whole idea of a low carbon economy becomes something you can own as a country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Megan, because, I think you've managed to say many things within those few sentences, which are really, really critical for us. And I just wanted to ask you also, what are the various projects that you're doing right now? And, maybe it would be nice to know what is exciting, what are the exciting things that you're doing, especially with regard to nature-based tourism, because there's a lot that, that I know that you've been doing in that space as well.
Well, yeah, I'm in transition right now. So there's some things I can't announce, as I
Okay.
mentioned. But in terms of my overall commitment to what I want to do, what I'm looking to do, certainly I've already referenced much of it. I want to bring this concessionary finance concept to fruition. We're targeting Canada and Southeast Asia at the moment, but it could work in any economy because we're seeing very, very large commitments now to that worldwide, and we need to get organized in country after country if we want to get that. So that's high on my agenda. And then in terms of even, there's certain things I haven't done yet that I think of India, I'd really love to do, and that is demand management. When you talk about the Taj, it just, drives me nuts that they can't. I know it's a very complicated management situation. I understand. But the overall principle is that once you set up an IT system, which India is, very well qualified to set up, you can just have people make, time-based reservations, and companies can get priority if they, reserve by block in advance. I mean, these are standard systems. And so I'm really concerned about World Heritage monuments in general. I think they're, really not going to be preserved more after the pandemic. I see them as being in equal, if not worse, jeopardy, because they don't have the management systems in place. And they're still not even really, that I've heard, unless I'm missing it, having good, conversations about it. They seem to be kind of lost, So I'm very concerned about that. And then so finance, protection of heritage assets, and then of course the environment. That gets back to my carbon campaign. I mean, I just feel that we have to tie our decision making to carbon emissions. And the other big one that's really, I have to admit, scary is carbon resilience. I get asked now about how much, for the first time ever, I did a major US media interview, which hasn't come out yet, on tourism and climate change. First time ever. What did they ask me? The first question, it was fascinating. How much infrastructure is in jeopardy? I have never had that question before. And all I could say is that according to the research I did for the last report in 2019, we still only have one study on that. And that was for the Caribbean. And that is, in terms of sea level rise and the fact that so many of our hotels are right on the coast, we're likely to see some pretty scary things happening in the next 10 years. So what do we need to do? Again, what can we do? We can put in, systems of barriers. We can add natural barriers. We need to look at, as a community, as a hotel community, especially in country after country, where, what is the level of jeopardy that your facilities are in? Because they likely are. So I don't even want to lead that necessarily. I just want to be sure that someone is doing it. Because if you see everything that's happening this year, as you know, with the wildfires and the way that
The
they're spreading
floods.
here in Oregon, I was just reading the paper this morning, the wildfires in Oregon are now creating their own weather system, for heaven's sakes. So it's, and I'm on the East Coast, right? I had a moon that was orange and a sun that was orange because of wildfires on the West Coast. Okay.
Wow.
So we're
Wow.
seeing that move, Cyprus, I've been working with them, is reporting wildfires. And so we're seeing those fires, but obviously the sea level rise is coming. It's coming. So I think I'm starting to say, and I've been cautious, but we are in an emergency and we need to act like we are in one. So I'm trying to just allocate my time as much as I can to helping people to make good decisions.
So, Megan, just one last question: how do you think the local communities could participate in change in the next few years? Do you think that's already happening?
Yes, well, I think it is partly because of the pandemic. Because tourism disappeared, of course, that created both a lot of hardship for many people that were working, right? But it also, for local residents, I think that they just noticed that their well-being was better. sadly, that especially in crowded destinations like Venice, Amsterdam, and Honolulu. And so just in the last week, I've been dealing with all of those cases. And what we're seeing is that local residents in these destinations are standing up to government now. They're not satisfied anymore with being told this is a fait accompli. It's something that absolutely we cannot change the tide on. We need to accept these cruise ships just as they are. We need to keep expanding our airports, and we need to accept as many visitors as possible, right? And the local residents are saying, no, we don't believe that that is the best thing for our well-being. And we do want to change. We live here, you know, it's our right to suggest alternatives. And so for people in my line of work, this is music to my ears. I think some people would be surprised to hear that because you know, I support tourism, but I support it in a way that also provides well-being for local people. But you can't win that argument unless the local people, you know, really do speak up. Otherwise, you know, they're not my allies. They're innocent victims is what they are. And I can only speak so much for the innocent victim. But if they say, wait, no, we want change, like all change makers, then it allows us to speak more forcefully with the power players. So I hope throughout India, there's got to be plenty of examples like Goa or others. I don't want to pick on Goa too much, but you know, on places that might have a little bit of overcrowding problems or you know, are being trampled a bit. That's the places I encourage all of you that live in those places. Remember, you deserve well-being. You should be getting something out of tourism. So, you know, don't fail to speak up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing that, Megan, because, you know, it is this kind of leadership that will, you know, that will hopefully help us build some sort of barrier, you know, and or slow it down to whatever degree possible. In fact, we are particularly worried, as you might imagine, because we are, you know, South Asia will be very hit very hard, I believe, and we have 1/4 of the world's population, so it's not going to be pretty. And you know, and of course, all of this is affecting migration patterns, and you know, many of that. I mean, a lot of that is changing, you know, changing the way we are as a society. So, you know, so we are really we're watching this happen in real time as well. We're watching the cyclones come in. We're watching the floods, the frequency of floods going up. So all of that, you know, all the things that you've just said, ring, you know, they're really immediate for us as concerns. And, you know, it's just nice. However, I mean, I perhaps it's a time to say this, but I don't know about governments. I really hope that they would listen to some of the things that you've said on this forum today. But I know you know, there are many entrepreneurs who are, at least in this country, trying to, you know, trying to arrest migration, trying to do that using tourism as a force for good. So, you know, there are many linkages. There are many fantastic ways how, like you said, we can, you know, we can balance it out, both tourism and climate change. You know, we have to address them simultaneously. Yes, so thank you so much, Megan. I think what I'm taking away from this conversation today is that financial restructuring, technology, and you know, and just commitment to mitigating climate change. Those are the three things that, you know, that perhaps we could be looking at
And
carefully.
training,
And
special.
training. Yes,
Specialized
absolutely.
training.
Absolutely. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for your time. And I hope we can lure you to our part of the world when the skies open up a little bit soon enough. And let's hope that we can work on projects together very soon. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shorty. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you.